My name is Eleanor Vance, and I was a woman who believed in order and rules, in the quiet agreement that keeps society from unraveling. For 28 years, my life in Willow Creek, nestled amidst the rolling hills of Vermont, had been a testament to that belief. I was a librarian at the Willow Creek Public Library, a place of hushed reverence for stories and knowledge. My days were a comforting rhythm of organizing books, helping patrons find their next great read, and occasionally shushing a particularly boisterous child. My apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom above Miller's Bakery, smelled perpetually of warm bread and cinnamon, a scent that was as much a part of my daily life as the feel of worn pages in my hands. I woke with the sun, brewed a pot of strong black coffee, and then before the library doors even thought about opening, I'd be out on my bicycle. That bicycle, a vintage sky blue Raleigh I'd painstakingly restored myself, was more than just transportation. It was my freedom, my morning meditation. The route I took every morning was etched into my memory, a winding path through the town, past Whispering Pines Park, and then a dedicated bike lane that ran alongside Old Mill Road. Old Mill Road was beautiful, lined with ancient maple trees that offered dappled shade in the summer and burst into fiery reds and golds in the fall. It had one lane for cars and then, blessedly, a wide, clearly marked bike lane. And when I say clearly marked, I mean it. Every 10 feet, there were bright yellow signs, almost aggressively polite, stating, "No stopping, bike lane." You couldn't miss them. Unless, of course, you deliberately chose to. Most days, my morning ride was peaceful, a time for me to clear my head, listen to the chirping birds, and feel the cool Vermont air on my face. I'd think about the day ahead, about the new shipment of books coming in, or perhaps a tricky reference question I needed to solve. I was a creature of habit, and I found immense comfort in that. My life wasn't exciting in the way some people sought excitement, but it was rich with small, reliable joys. I had a couple of close friends who were anchors in my life. There was Arthur Finch, the 70-year-old owner of Finch's Hardware store, a gruff man with a heart of gold and a surprising love for poetry. He was my mentor in a way, offering sage advice over cups of lukewarm coffee in his cluttered back office. He'd seen a lot of life, and his wisdom, often delivered with a dry wit, was a constant source of comfort. Then there was Clara Davies, a whirlwind of vibrant energy who owned the local flower shop, Pedal Pushers. Clara was my confidant, my sounding board. She was fiercely loyal, always ready with a hug or a sharp retort, whatever the situation called for. She was the one who could always pull me out of my occasional bouts of quiet introspection and remind me to live a little. My biggest challenge, if you could even call it that, on my daily commute was the routine disregard for the bike lane signs. Almost every single day, without fail, I would encounter at least one car parked squarely in the dedicated bike lane. Sometimes it was a delivery truck making a quick drop-off, which, while annoying, I could somewhat understand. But more often, it was just a regular car, hazard lights blinking, driver inside, completely oblivious or simply uncaring. I'd sigh, maneuver around them, and try to let it go. It was a minor inconvenience, a small crack in the ordered world I preferred, but not worth getting truly upset about. I prided myself on my patience, my ability to choose my battles. I remember one particular Tuesday morning. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of wood smoke, a perfect fall day. I was enjoying the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt, watching the sunbeams dance through the turning leaves. Up ahead, I saw it, as predictable as the sunrise, a bright red Prius parked right in the middle of the bike lane. Its hazard lights were flashing, a futile attempt to signal a temporary reprieve from the rules. The driver was clearly visible, head craned, engrossed in a phone conversation. Usually, I'd just swing wide, a slight irritation bubbling beneath my calm exterior. But something in me snapped that day. Maybe it was the cumulative effect of months of polite frustration. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of this particular driver, so completely unconcerned with anyone else. Or maybe it was just a Tuesday. Whatever it was, I didn't swerve, I didn't sigh. I just stopped. My front wheel was inches from the driver's. Side door. The man inside, a broad-shouldered individual with slicked back dark hair and a perpetually smug expression, finally looked up from his phone, startled. His eyes, dark and beady, narrowed as he saw me. He gestured impatiently for me to go around, a dismissive flick of his wrist. He didn't even bother to end his call. That gesture, that dismissive flick of the wrist, solidified something within me. It was the embodiment of everything I quietly resented. The assumption of privilege, the blatant disregard for shared spaces, the casual disrespect for others. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. I folded my arms over my chest, a silent, unwavering blockade. He scowled, mumbled something into his phone, and then, with an exasperated sigh, finally lowered it. He rolled down his window, revealing a face I already recognized from around town, Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne, the man who had bought out the old Hawthorne Mill and was constantly trying to push through zoning changes for some new, soulless development. He was known for cutting corners, for his aggressive business tactics, and for his general air of superiority. He was everything I was not and everything I disliked. What do you want? He barked, his voice rough, impatient. My voice, usually soft, was steady and clear. You're in the bike lane, Mr. Thorne, he scoffed. I'm making a quick call. It'll be 5 minutes. Just go around. The signs are quite clear, I said, my gaze unwavering. No stopping. He rolled his eyes. Are you serious? You're holding up traffic for this? You're holding up the bike lane, I corrected him. And I'm not moving until you do. A flicker of genuine annoyance, then anger, crossed his face. Listen, lady, I'm a busy man. I don't have time for this nonsense. Neither do I replied, my voice gaining a quiet steeliness. But I have time to wait for you to move your car. He swore under his breath, a low guttural sound. He started his car, put it in drive, and then, with a huff, slowly pulled out of the bike lane and onto the main road. I didn't move until he was completely clear. Then I uncrossed my arms, got back on my bike, and deliberately, slowly pulled out onto the main lane. I pedaled at a leisurely 5 miles per hour, centered in the lane, leaving no room for him to pass. Behind me, I heard the first impatient blare of his horn, and then another, and another. He laid on the horn a long, continuous shriek of frustration that echoed through the quiet morning. But there was no passing lane, no shoulder wide enough. He was stuck. For a full mile, the insistent, angry blare of his horn was my soundtrack. I didn't look back. I just pedaled slowly, deliberately, a small triumphant smile playing on my lips. It was a tiny act of rebellion, a small assertion of order against chaos. It felt surprisingly good. I arrived at the library that day feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. The small victory against Marcus Thorne, the satisfying image of him trapped behind me, was exhilarating. But the unease came from the feeling that I had poked a bear. Marcus Thorne wasn't the type to let even small slights go. Still, I pushed it aside. What could he do? I was just a librarian. The weeks that followed the bike lane incident were, for a time, uneventful. I convinced myself that Marcus Thorne had simply forgotten about the irritating woman on the bicycle. Life at the library settled back into its comfortable rhythm. Arthur and Clara provided their usual doses of wisdom and laughter. I spent my evenings reading, tending to my small herb garden on the fire escape, and enjoying the quiet solitude of my apartment. Then things started to shift. Subtly at first. It began with small annoyances at the library. A new, oddly restrictive policy on interlibrary loans appeared, making it harder for patrons to access books from other branches. Then the budget for new acquisitions was inexplicably slashed, forcing me to prioritize popular fiction over the more niche academic titles our dedicated readers often sought. When I inquired, I was met with vague answers about new financial directives from the town council. It was frustrating, but I dismissed it as typical bureaucratic red tape. The first real tremor of something being amiss came during the annual Willow Creek Heritage Festival. I was coordinating the library's booth, a display of local history books, and a children's storytelling corner. It was usually a beloved event, a chance for the community to come together. But this year, the festival organizers suddenly revoked our prime spot near the bandstand, reassigning us to a cramped, out-of-the-way corner near the public restrooms. When I protested, the head organizer, a usually jovial man named Mr. Henderson, looked genuinely uncomfortable. Orders from above, Eleanor? He'd mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Couldn't do anything about it. Something about space allocation. It felt like a deliberate slight, but I couldn't connect it to anything specific. I just knew it felt wrong. Still, I pushed through, determined not to let it ruin the festival for the children. The true betrayal, the one that shattered my neatly ordered world, came swiftly and brutally, like a sudden unexpected punch to the gut. It began with a town council meeting, one I almost didn't attend. They were discussing the annual budget, and frankly, I found such meetings tedious. But Arthur, ever the civic-minded citizen, had urged me to go. Always good to keep an eye on where our tax dollars are going, Eleanor, he'd said, winking. I sat in the back of the small, stuffy town hall, listening to the monotonous drone of figures and projections. Then the agenda item changed. Proposed renovation and modernization of Willow Creek Public Library. My ears perked up. Renovation? This was news to me. The library was old but well-maintained, a beloved landmark. The presentation began, given by a slick young architect I'd never seen before. He spoke of transforming the library into a vibrant multi-purpose community hub. He showed glossy renderings of sleek, modern spaces, glass walls, and digital kiosks. And then he dropped the bombshell. To facilitate this necessary modernization, he announced, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips, the current library building will be demolished. A collective gasp went through the small audience. My own breath caught in my throat. Demolished? The Willow Creek Public Library, a building that had stood for over a century, the very heart of our community, torn down? My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening, and then Marcus Thorne rose from his seat at the front of the room, a triumphant gleam in his dark eyes. He strode to the podium, taking the microphone from the architect. Friends, neighbors, he began, his voice booming with false magnanimity. I know this news comes as a surprise. But sometimes progress demands difficult decisions. As many of you know, my company, Thorne Developments, has been actively working to revitalize Willow Creek. We've seen immense potential here, potential that has been, frankly, untapped. My blood ran cold. Thorne Developments. My mind flashed back to the bike lane incident, the smug face, the dismissive hand gesture. This wasn't just about progress. This was personal. He continued, laying out his vision. The library land, he explained, was in a prime location, perfect for a new mixed-use development, luxury condominiums on the upper floors, retail spaces on the ground floor. The new library he generously offered would be a much smaller, more efficient space on the outskirts of town, housed in one of his new commercial complexes. It would, he assured everyone, be state-of-the-art. The crowd was murmuring, a mix of shock and confusion. Some looked angry, others simply bewildered. I could feel a hot wave of indignation rising in my chest. This was a calculated move. A power play, and I was sure somehow that I was at the center of it. When the floor was opened for questions, I was the first to my feet, my hand trembling slightly. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. As the head librarian, I was completely unaware of any such plans. How could a decision of this magnitude, one that affects the very fabric of our community, be made without any consultation with the library staff, or indeed, the community itself? He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment I saw a flicker of recognition, a cold, hard glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He smiled, a thin, cruel line. Miss Vance? Yes, I believe we've had the pleasure. You see, these decisions are made at a higher level. It's about the greater good, about bringing Willow Creek into the 21st century. Sometimes sacrifices must be made. Sacrifices. He meant my sacrifice, our sacrifice. The sacrifice of a place that held so much history, so many memories. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift and devastating. The town council, many of whom seemed to be in Thorne's pocket, quickly approved the demolition. My impassioned pleas, supported by a handful of outraged citizens and a surprisingly vocal Arthur and Clara, fell on deaf ears. Petitions were started, protests organized, but Thorne's influence, his money, and his relentless PR campaign painted us as Luddites, clinging to the past. The library staff, most of whom had dedicated their lives to the institution, were given their termination notices. Redundancy, they called it. Streamlining. I was given a formal letter citing performance issues, vague, unfounded accusations that stung with their injustice. They were fabricating a reason to get rid of me to ensure I had no legal recourse. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was Marcus Thorne's revenge. He hadn't forgotten the bike lane. He was a man who punished even the smallest perceived. Insult with disproportionate force. My emotional state plummeted. The library wasn't just my job. It was my identity, my purpose. I poured my heart and soul into that place. Now it was being torn down, and I was being cast aside like an inconvenient obstacle. I felt a profound sense of loss, a gnawing emptiness where my daily routines and future plans used to be. Financial damage quickly followed. Without my income and with no immediate prospects in a small town like Willow Creek, I saw my carefully built savings dwindle. I had always been frugal, but the unexpected job loss, coupled with the rising cost of living, meant I was constantly worried about making rent, about how I would afford groceries. The security I had always known, the quiet comfort of a stable life, was gone. My social life, too, suffered. While Arthur and Clara were unwavering in their support, the community was fractured. Some sided with Thorne, dazzled by the promise of progress and new jobs. Others, though sympathetic, seemed to resign themselves to the inevitable, too afraid to openly challenge a powerful figure like Thorne. I felt isolated, adrift in a town that no longer felt like home. I spent my days in a haze of despair. I'd walk by the library, now a construction site, surrounded by chain-link fences, the windows boarded up like vacant eyes. The sound of heavy machinery, the tearing, ripping sounds of the building being dismantled, was a constant agonizing reminder of my loss. I'd sit in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, searching for what I could have done differently. The anger, a cold hard knot in my stomach, grew with each passing day. It was a silent, simmering rage, fueled by injustice and the sheer audacity of Marcus Thorne. I barely slept, haunted by images of the library's demolition. My appetite vanished. Clara tried to cheer me up, bringing me elaborate floral arrangements and baking me my favorite lemon poppy seed muffins, but her efforts felt futile against the weight of my sorrow. Arthur, in his quiet way, just listened, offering a steady presence, a silent acknowledgement of my pain. "It's not fair, Arthur," I'd whispered one evening, tears finally escaping as I sat in his cluttered hardware store, the scent of sawdust and metal filling the air. He destroyed everything. For what? Because I asked him to move his car? Arthur, polishing a tarnished brass doorknob, looked at me, his eyes surprisingly gentle. "Eleanor, some men, they see a challenge in anything that isn't immediate compliance. Marcus Thorne, he's one of them. He doesn't see people. He sees obstacles. And you, my dear, were an obstacle he decided to remove. He wanted to make an example of you." His words, though harsh, were a strange kind of comfort. It wasn't me, it was him. It was his twisted sense of power and entitlement. But that didn't make the pain less, or the anger less potent. The anger began to shift, to solidify. It wasn't just a hot, volatile emotion anymore. It became a cold, precise instrument. I realized that merely feeling angry was pointless. It changed nothing. What I needed was action. I needed to fight back. Not with protests, not with petitions, but with something far more insidious. Something that would dismantle him the way he had dismantled my life. I started to read, not for pleasure, but for purpose. I devoured books on corporate law, zoning regulations, financial loopholes, and local politics. I spent hours at a different library in a neighboring town poring over archives, researching Thorne developments, looking for any weakness, any crack in his carefully constructed empire. I learned about his past projects, his business partners, his financial dealings. The more I learned, the clearer his pattern of exploitation and disregard became. He operated on the edge of legality, always just skirting true criminal behavior, but his methods were ethically corrupt. I started to see the connections, the web of influence he had spun around Willow Creek, the town council members who had voted for the demolition. Many of them had received donations from Thorne Developments for their re-election campaigns. The architect who presented the plan, he was a frequent collaborator on Thorne's other projects. It was all so intertwined, so deliberately constructed. My despair began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. The tears dried up, replaced by a steely glint in my eyes. The constant ache in my stomach morphed into a knot of focus. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I was a survivor, and more than that, I was becoming a strategist. I started sketching out ideas, elaborate schemes, then tearing them up, discarding them. They were too messy, too risky, too easily traced back to me. I needed something subtle, something that would dismantle his empire from within, something that would leave him utterly exposed and ruined, but without a single trace leading back To Eleanor Vance, the quiet librarian, Arthur, with his vast knowledge of local history and his surprisingly deep network of connections, became an unwitting accomplice in my research. I'd ask him seemingly innocuous questions about old land deeds, about forgotten town ordinances, about the history of certain businesses. He never questioned my sudden interest in these arcane topics. He just provided the information, often adding little anecdotes or insights that proved invaluable. Clara, too, played a vital role, though she remained unaware of the true depth of my intentions. Her flower shop was a hub of local gossip, and Clara, with her open, friendly demeanor, was privy to many whispered conversations. I'd casually ask her about Thorne's social life, his associates, the rumors swirling around his new developments. She'd chatter away, unwittingly providing me with pieces of the puzzle I was meticulously assembling. The most challenging part of my plan, I realized, was not just finding a weakness, but exploiting it without being caught. Marcus Thorne was powerful, and he had a reputation for ruthlessness. If he even suspected I was behind his downfall, he would crush me without a second thought. I needed to be invisible, a ghost in the machine. My focus became laser sharp. I enrolled in an online course on digital forensics and another on corporate finance, spending late nights hunched over my laptop, absorbing information like a sponge. I learned how to track money trails, how to identify shell companies, how to uncover hidden assets. I practiced creating untraceable digital footprints, masking my online activities, becoming a phantom in the vast ocean of the internet. The small apartment above Miller's Bakery, once a haven of peace, transformed into my war room. Walls were covered with flowcharts, sticky notes with names and dates, newspaper clippings, and legal documents. It looked like the lair of a madwoman, but to me it was a map to justice. My old self, the quiet librarian who valued order and avoided conflict, was slowly being replaced by someone new. Someone colder, more calculating, utterly consumed by a singular purpose, revenge. But it wasn't just about vengeance. It was about exposing a predator, about righting a wrong, about ensuring that no one else in Willow Creek would suffer the way I had suffered. It was about reclaiming not just my life, but the soul of my town. The core of my plan started to crystallize around Thorne's latest, largest project, the Willow Creek Grand Promenade, the mixed-use development he was building on the very land where the library once stood. This project was his crowning achievement, his legacy. It was also, I suspected, his most vulnerable point. He had poured vast sums of money into it, pushing the boundaries of what was financially sound, relying on shady backroom deals and inflated projections. I uncovered a series of irregularities in the initial land acquisition for the promenade. He had acquired several smaller plots of land from elderly residents, supposedly at fair market value. But my research revealed that these residents, many of whom were financially vulnerable and easily swayed, had been subtly pressured, even intimidated, into selling at prices far below their actual worth. He had used a series of shell corporations to obscure his direct involvement, making it look like legitimate, independent transactions. This was the first thread I would pull. The second thread involved his primary investor, a shadowy group called Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings had a history of investing in controversial developments, often with questionable environmental practices and a track record of legal disputes. I suspected Thorne had made promises to Apex that he couldn't legally keep, or that he was hiding aspects of the project's true cost or environmental impact from them. My strategy was multifaceted. I would expose the fraudulent land acquisitions, creating a legal nightmare for Thorne and potentially halting the promenade. Simultaneously, I would subtly leak information to Apex Holdings that would undermine their confidence in Thorne, revealing his shady dealings and the true risks of their investment. And finally, I would plant seeds of doubt within the community, using the very local media he had tried to control, turning public opinion against him. It was a slow burn, a game of chess played with real lives and real consequences. Each step required meticulous planning, careful execution, and absolute secrecy. I became a master of disguise, not literally, but in my behavior. To the outside world, I was still the quiet, unemployed librarian struggling to make ends meet. Inside, I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. My allies, though unwitting, remained crucial. Arthur continued to be my source for historical tidbits and local gossip, offering insights into the town's deep-rooted biases and allegiances. Clara, with her boundless energy and network, unknowingly provided me with fragments of information about Thorne's social circles, his vulnerabilities, and the growing anxieties among local businesses affected by his large-scale developments. I carefully filtered the information I needed from their casual conversations, piecing together the larger picture. One afternoon, sitting in Arthur's dusty back office, he mentioned an old property dispute from decades ago involving a forgotten easement that ran through the very land where the promenade was now being built. Property lines were a bit fuzzy back then, he mused, and old Mr. Abernathy, who was a stickler for his rights, swore up and down that path was his, despite what the town said. My heart skipped a beat. An easement. A legal right to use another person's land for a specific purpose. If an old, forgotten easement still existed and Thorne had built over it, it could invalidate the entire project. This was a gold mine. I spent weeks in the county records office, disguised in oversized glasses and a frumpy wig, poring over brittle yellow documents until I found it. A forgotten, perfectly legal easement granting public access across a specific portion of the library land, a portion Thorne had built directly over. It was a small detail, but legally it was a massive oversight. He hadn't done his due diligence, or he had deliberately ignored it, thinking no one would ever notice. He had effectively built his grand promenade on legally contested land. This was my hidden weapon. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one slip-up, and everything could come crashing down. But the thought of Thorne's smug face, the image of the library being reduced to rubble, kept me going. This wasn't just revenge. It was redemption. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. I found an online forum for disgruntled former employees of Thorne Developments. They spoke in hushed tones about his unethical practices, his habit of cutting corners on safety and quality, and his aggressive tactics towards contractors who questioned him. One post in particular caught my eye. A former project manager hinted at a secret escrow account used for unconventional payments to secure permits and bypass regulations. This was the financial nail in his coffin. I knew how to find those accounts, how to trace those payments. I just needed to time my moves perfectly. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. The quiet librarian was ready to dismantle an empire. The revenge wouldn't be easy, but it would be complete, and he would never see it coming. The night before I was set to execute the first phase of my plan, I couldn't sleep. The air in my apartment was thick with anticipation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of nervous energy and fierce determination. I had meticulously reviewed every detail, every contingency, 1,000 times over. My war room, once chaotic, was now a neatly organized archive of damning evidence, a testament to months of relentless work. My plan unfolded in stages, a carefully choreographed dance designed to dismantle Marcus Thorne's empire piece by piece, all while maintaining my anonymity. I wanted him to fall, but I wanted him to wonder why. To suspect everyone but me. My first target was the Willow Creek Grand Promenade, Thorne's crown jewel. The forgotten easement I had uncovered was the perfect weapon. I couldn't directly reveal myself as the source, of course. Instead, I carefully drafted an anonymous letter, detailing the exact parcel of land, the historical deed references, and the legal implications of building on an active, albeit overlooked, public easement. I included copies of the ancient documents, subtly altered to remove any identifying marks of my research. I mailed the letter to the Willow Creek Historical Society, knowing their meticulous director, a stickler for historical preservation, would take it seriously. I also sent copies via encrypted email to a few key local journalists who I knew were genuinely committed to uncovering corruption, but who had been effectively muzzling themselves due to Thorne's influence. I chose journalists from smaller, independent news outlets, figuring they'd be less susceptible to his immediate pressures. The next morning, the town buzzed. The Historical Society, after verifying the information, immediately issued a cease and desist order for the promenade construction. The local news, emboldened by the concrete evidence, ran front-page stories about the historical land dispute. The construction site, once a hive of activity, ground to a halt. Marcus Thorne was furious. I saw his enraged face on the evening news, dismissing the claims as baseless attacks and historical inaccuracies. But the legal challenge was legitimate, and the public outcry fueled by the local news was growing. The construction company refused to proceed until the legal issues were resolved, fearing costly lawsuits. This was my first victory, and it tasted sweet. He was bleeding money with every day the project was stalled. My next target was Apex Holdings, Thorne's primary financial backer. I knew they were ruthless, driven solely by profit. If I could convince them Thorne was a liability, they would cut him loose. I created a fake identity online, a persona of a disgruntled former employee of Thorne Developments using a secure, untraceable virtual private network. Over several weeks, I carefully leaked fragmented but accurate information to Apex Holdings' Investor Relations Department. These weren't direct accusations, but rather subtle hints, anonymous financial reports showing discrepancies in project costs, leaked emails carefully fabricated, but based on real information I gathered suggesting cost-cutting measures that bordered on illegal, and most damningly, a detailed breakdown of the potential legal ramifications of the easement dispute, showing how much money Apex could lose if the project was permanently stalled or forced to pay massive settlements. I also subtly introduced them to the whispers of Thorne's escrow account, hinting at a pattern of illicit payments to secure permits. I didn't provide concrete proof yet, just enough to sow suspicion. One new Apex Holdings conducted their own rigorous due diligence. My goal was to create enough doubt for them to launch their own internal investigation into Thorne. The tension mounted. Thorne, desperate to get the promenade back on track, publicly downplayed the easement issue, promising quick resolution. But behind the scenes, I knew he was scrambling. Lawyers were being hired, frantic phone calls were being made. I could almost feel his rising panic. While the legal and financial pressures mounted, I began to turn the tide of public opinion against him. I had already primed the local journalists with the easement story. Now I fed them new angles, focusing on the human cost of Thorne's ruthless expansion. I anonymously contacted a few elderly residents who had been forced to sell their homes at unfairly low prices for the Promenade project. I encouraged them, carefully and without revealing my identity, to tell their stories to the local news. I provided them with legal aid contacts and moral support, ensuring they felt empowered to speak out. Their stories of manipulation and bullying painted a stark picture of Thorne's true character. I also created a powerful online campaign, a ghost account on various social media platforms posing as a concerned citizen. I shared the articles from the local news, highlighted the plight of the elderly residents, and most effectively started a digital memorial for the demolished library, inviting people to share their memories. The outpouring of grief and anger was overwhelming. The public perception of Marcus Thorne shifted from visionary developer to ruthless profiteer. The calls for his resignation from various boards and committees began to grow louder. Petitions, this time against Thorne, gathered thousands of signatures. He was being publicly shamed, his reputation crumbling around him. The final, most devastating blow was the revelation of the secret escrow account. This was the clever twist he never saw coming, the one that would ensure not just his public downfall, but his complete financial ruin and, hopefully, imprisonment. Through my digital forensic skills, combined with the subtle hints I gathered from the disgruntled former employees, I had managed to trace the existence of a highly compartmentalized offshore escrow account. This account wasn't just for unconventional payments as the former employees had hinted. It was a sophisticated scheme of money laundering and bank fraud. Thorne was using this account to inflate project costs, divert funds, and pay off key officials to fast-track permits and approvals, bypassing environmental regulations and safety standards. He was effectively defrauding the banks that loaned him money as well as his investors by presenting fraudulent expense reports. This was far more than just ethical misconduct. This was criminal. I compiled an irrefutable dossier of evidence. Wire transfer records, forged invoices, doctored contracts, and internal communications that explicitly detailed his scheme. It was months of painstaking, relentless work, but the picture it painted was clear. Marcus Thorne was a criminal, operating on a massive scale. I knew directly submitting this to the authorities would likely lead to a lengthy investigation, giving Thorne time to cover his tracks. I needed to ensure an immediate, undeniable impact. So I sent the entire dossier, anonymously, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit. But I also sent a highly condensed, explosive version of the information to a respected national investigative journalism team known for their in-depth exposes. I timed it to coincide with a major public appearance Thorne was scheduled to make, a press conference where he intended to dismiss the easement issue and announce new financing for the promenade. The day of the press conference dawned, crisp and clear. I sat in my apartment, watching the live stream on my laptop, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. Marcus Thorne, ever the showman, stood at the podium, a forced smile plastered on his face. He began his rehearsed speech, dismissing the small hiccup of the easement, assuring everyone of his commitment to Willow Creek. Then, just as he was about to announce his new financing, his phone, which he had left on the podium, buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face, for the first time, crumpled. It was a headline alert from the National News Network. Investigative report, Thorne Developments. Implicated in multi-million-dollar bank fraud scheme, money laundering. A stunned silence fell over the room. The journalists who had also received the tip-off began shouting questions. Thorne's eyes darted around, wild with panic. He tried to stammer out a denial, but his voice cracked. Then an even more dramatic moment. A reporter holding up a printout shouted, "Mr. Thorne, sources within the FBI confirm an active investigation into your financial dealings. Can you comment on the offshore escrow account and the allegations of defrauding your investors?" Thorne went pale, his carefully constructed facade shattered. He pushed past the microphones, his security scrambling to shield him, and fled the podium. The press conference devolved into chaos. That evening, the news was inescapable. The national report was devastatingly thorough, presenting the evidence I had compiled with chilling precision. Apex Holdings publicly announced they were pulling all investment from Thorne Developments, citing irreconcilable differences and egregious financial misconduct. Banks were recalling loans. Legal action was being initiated on multiple fronts. Thorne's empire was collapsing, not with a bang, but with a series of catastrophic implosions. I watched it all unfold from the quiet safety of my apartment. There was no exhilaration, no triumphant cheer. Just a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. Justice, a cold, unyielding force, was finally being served. The man who had torn down my life, my library, and my sense of order was now facing the consequences of his own brazen disregard for rules, for ethics, for humanity. He hadn't just stopped in a bike lane. He had ridden roughshod over everything decent, and now he was paying the price, the aftermath of Marcus. Thorne's downfall was a maelstrom of legal proceedings and public recrimination. He was arrested within 48 hours of the National News expose, charged with multiple counts of bank fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence I had so meticulously gathered, corroborated by the FBI's own investigations, which my leaks had initiated, was overwhelming. There was no escape for him. Willow Creek, a town once lulled into a false sense of security by Thorne's promises of progress, was reeling. The news of his criminal activities, particularly the fraudulent land acquisitions from the elderly, sparked outrage. The community, once divided, largely united in anger against him. The Willow Creek Grand Promenade project, his supposed legacy, was permanently halted, a concrete skeleton standing as a monument to his greed and hubris. The land, now entangled in legal limbo, sat stagnant, an ugly scar on the landscape where our beloved library once stood. Justice, in its purest form, was served. Thorne was found guilty on all major counts. His appeals were swiftly rejected. He received a lengthy prison sentence, and his assets were seized to compensate the victims of his fraud. The feeling of vindication was immense, a deep satisfaction. That settled in my bones. He was gone, his power stripped away, his name synonymous with corruption in Willow Creek. But true justice, I learned, isn't always clean or easy. The scars remained. The library, the physical embodiment of my life's work and a century of community history, was gone forever. Its demolition had left an irreparable void, a raw wound in the heart of Willow Creek, while the town rallied to establish a new, smaller library in a temporary location. It wasn't the same. The old building's charm, its familiar scent of old books and quiet contemplation, was irreplaceable, and I, Eleanor Vance, was changed too. The quiet librarian who once found comfort in routine and order had become a strategist, a covert operative, capable of dismantling an empire. The experience had honed my intellect, sharpened my resolve, and introduced me to a darker side of myself, a capacity for meticulous, calculated revenge. While I felt no regret for my actions, the journey had left its mark. The naive belief in inherent fairness had been shattered. I now saw the world with a clearer, more cynical eye, understanding that sometimes justice had to be manufactured, forced into existence. My relationship with Arthur and Clara deepened in the aftermath. They had been my unwitting allies, and when the full scope of Thorne's crimes became public, they, along with the rest of the town, began to piece together my quiet, relentless inquiries. I never explicitly admitted my role, but in their knowing glances, their quiet nods, and their unwavering support, I knew they understood. They saw the transformation in me from the bookish woman to the silent avenger, and they respected it. Arthur, in particular, seemed to take a quiet pride in my transformation. One afternoon, while I was helping him sort through old ledgers at his hardware store, he looked at me over his spectacles. "You know, Eleanor?" he said, his voice gruff but kind. "That old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword? Well, sometimes the research is mightier than both." He winked, a rare, knowing gesture. Clara, always more outwardly emotional, gave me a fierce hug after Thorne's sentencing. "You did it, Ellie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did what no one else could. You saved this town from that monster." Her belief in me was a balm to the colder parts of my soul. I never returned to working in a traditional library. The experience of being cast out and the feeling of having to rebuild from scratch pushed me in a new direction. With the skills I had painstakingly acquired in digital forensics and corporate finance, I started a small, discreet consulting firm, offering my services to individuals and small communities who were fighting against corporate exploitation and land grabs. I worked under a new name, operating largely online, maintaining the anonymity that had served me so well. I became a silent guardian, using my unique blend of knowledge and quiet determination to help others fight their own Goliaths. Willow Creek slowly began to heal. The community organized fundraisers, and eventually, with the remaining Thorne assets, they decided to build a smaller, more modern, but still community-focused library on a new plot of land. I donated anonymously to the cause, finding a quiet sense of peace and contributing to its rebirth. Even if I wasn't directly involved in its day-to-day operations, I still rode my sky blue Raleigh every morning, though my route had changed, avoiding the skeletal remains of the promenade. The signs for no stopping bike lane were still there, still ignored by some, but now when I saw a car parked there, I no longer felt the simmering anger. The experience with Thorne had taught me to pick my battles, and I'd fought the biggest one I could imagine. The world wasn't a perfectly ordered place, I knew that now. It was messy, unfair, and often cruel. But I also knew that sometimes, with enough patience, enough research, and enough quiet resolve, you could nudge it back towards justice. The quiet librarian had finally learned that sometimes, to restore order, you had to dismantle everything. And Marcus Thorne learned, far too late, that even the quietest woman can wield the sharpest weapon.